Our reading today is called Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. In the 20th century, a number of thinkers studying comparative mythology and religion noticed something peculiar about the myths of different cultures throughout history. Many of them shared fundamental similarities in theme, structure, and symbolism. This led to the question as to how such similarities could arise in cultures separated by both space and time. Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, two of the more prominent thinkers studying this problem, proposed that the reason for such similarities was due to the fact that many mythological themes and symbols emerge from an area of the mind called the collective unconscious. In addition to the mind consisting of a personal unconscious, which is composed of elements drawn from an individual's life experience, the collective unconscious contains elements or cognitive structures which evolved over human history and are therefore common to all. These evolved cognitive structures, which Jung called archetypes, cannot be observed directly, but manifest various images or symbolic patterns which form the basis of many myths, explaining how similar myths can arise in cultures separated by hundreds or even thousands of years. As Joseph Campbell, the 20th century's foremost expert on world mythology, noted, the symbols of mythology are not manufactured. They cannot be ordered, invented, or permanently suppressed. They are spontaneous productions of the psyche. As manifestations of the deepest layers of the unconscious, myths are thought to reveal timeless truths about the yearnings, fears, and aspirations common to every individual. In the words of Jung, myths are first and foremost psychic phenomena that reveal the nature of the soul. The optimal possibility is to carve out your own corner of the world where you can nourish your potential and offer your work to others without concern of applause or fear of rejection. In doing so, you will have found your own unique pathway to bliss, and your life will have followed the thread of the hero's journey. What I think is that a good life is one hero journey after another. Over and over again, you are called to the realm of adventure. You are called to new horizons. Each time there is the same problem. Do I dare? And then if you do dare, the dangers are there and the help also in the fulfillment or the fiasco. There's always the possibility of a fiasco, but there's also the possibility of bliss.
I think I was about 7 when I got the best Christmas present I ever received. It was a large plastic X-Wing fighter, just like the one in the movie Star Wars. It looked just like the ship that blew up the Death Star. It was big enough that it even fit some of the little plastic Star Wars characters that I had been collecting. The best part, I think, was that when you pressed one of the buttons, it flashed and made noises like lasers firing. And if you pressed on R2D2's head, then the wings popped out into an actual X. It was the coolest thing I think I'd ever laid eyes on up until that point in my life. And it was all mine. I immediately started playing with it, obviously. But in the living room, where Santa had deposited his bounty of gifts on Christmas morning, was far too bright. There was the tree and the wrapping paper and all the lights. I needed somewhere where I could truly appreciate the flashing lights and loud noises. Why, my parents' bedroom seemed like just the place. It was dark. They were still sleeping for some silly reason. Didn't they know it was Christmas morning and Santa had come? Didn't they understand that the Death Star needed to be destroyed just then? So I zoomed in, pressing this button, making all kinds of loud beeps and providing additional noises and effects as needed. My skills as a Foley artist has always gone unappreciated. It seemed that they would continue to be unappreciated as my dad yelled at me to get out of his room. Some people just don't have the Christmas spirit. Well, my lifelong love of Star Wars began a couple of years earlier. They used to play Star Wars in theaters after it had been released. So when I was old enough, my aunt and uncle took me to see it. I loved it, but I was a little kid and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, my uncle, who, shall we say, has a reputation, thought he would be funny and told me that Luke Skywalker died at the end of the movie. Being a little boy, I immediately burst into tears and he was scolded furiously by my aunt. He would, of course, apologize, but the incident became something of family lore, a story we told over and over again, such that when The Last Jedi came out a few years back, I had to email him as soon as I finished seeing it to say, hey, Uncle Ed, Luke Skywalker dies at the end. Now, I'm sure some of you saw that last Tuesday was Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. And our theme for the month of May is story. Stories are powerful things. We convey messages through stories that would be complicated and cumbersome to explain in rational detail. Stories grab our attention, our heart as well as our head. Stories make a point, tell a message, have an impact on our whole being, and not just our minds. Perhaps that's why people have come back to storytelling over and over throughout human history. Indeed, it may not be too much of an exaggeration to say that the ability to tell stories is what makes us human. It is that fundamental to who we are. Religion, of course, has been one of the great stories of all time. Each religion tells a series of stories, a story about how the world began, about how our founder came to start the religion, a story about who we are, a story about how we can rise above the bad things in life and be transformed or forgiven, and even how things will end. Stories can give us hope. They can inspire us to live in a new and better way. They can provide a vision or a template for us. Stories are able to convey that larger perspective on life, appeal to a wide number of people, and they become what we refer back to again and again throughout our lives. When a story can do those things, we call them myths. Myth gets kind of a bad rap, a story that is factually untrue. However, I assert to you that myths are actually stories that are true, just from a different point of view. In our reading today, Joseph Campbell spent his entire life studying myths and teaching them too. Campbell was a student of Jung who said that these are stories that are kind of ingrained into us, what Jung called the collective unconscious. This was a storehouse of sorts that we all carry within our soul. And when we hear a story we like or resonate with, what we're really doing is rediscovering parts of ourselves, Jung says. A good myth is a mirror to the soul, a pathway for our hearts and minds to make sense of the world, because myths help us to relate to the world and make some sense out of the chaos. Aborigines in Australia have stories for roads and hills that they walk past, such that when they walk over a particular hill next to a field, they chant the story of what happened on that hill many generations ago. Their stories are literally tied to the land they occupy. Myths are not just for people a long time ago or in a land far, far away. Myths are with us. They're stories embedded in our consciousness that help us relate to the world around us, even if not quite so literally as our Aboriginal friends. There are modern myths, especially in our modern American culture, that loves to tell stories in the form of movies and TV shows. Now, I'm not saying that Keeping Up with the Kardashians is on the same level as Beowulf. I'm not making an aesthetic argument today. I am saying that some, very, very small number, but some of those movies and films that are with us in modern times touch those deep reservoirs of spiritual energy within our collective unconscious. They become stories that people relate to in their everyday lives. The lessons and insights in those stories become ours too. One such example that Campbell famously pointed out was the myth of the hero who must leave his or her home, fight evil, repair the world, and return back home transformed. The format of the myth is the same, but the protagonist changes. The hero has 1,000 faces. There are numerous references, religious references in Star Wars, particularly to Eastern religions. For example, Princess Amidala's first name is Padme, which is Sanskrit for lotus flower, a common symbol of enlightenment in Buddhism. True Star Wars nerds who've seen the expanded universe stuff may know Ahsoka Tano, Ahsoka, a famous Buddhist emperor. Star Wars is about who we are and how we become the people we ultimately become. Like Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and other Eastern religions, the myth tells us that we are a complicated mix of the holy and the profane. Everyone says that Darth Vader is irredeemably evil. Once you go down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny, Yoda says. By now you must know that your father can never be turned from the dark side, says the Emperor. And then there is that moment we see in Return of the Jedi that was our video this morning. Even Darth Vader says he's no longer his good half, Anakin Skywalker. His whole being is evil. He is Darth Vader instead. It is locked in. Only Luke Skywalker thinks otherwise. He sees in Darth Vader still the spark of the good man he once was. Perhaps it is Luke's desire to know the Father that had been absent his entire life that prevented him from ever giving up hope. But in the end, it is Darth Vader who fulfills the prophecy of returning balance to the Force by killing the Emperor and redeeming himself to the good side. Maybe my favorite moment in all of Star Wars is when Luke takes off the mask and finally sees his father, his real father, for the first time, moments before Anakin Skywalker dies. Here's a guy who's killed untold number of people and is able to die into the light. What religion could teach that the scariest, evilest, worst guy in the entire galaxy can get a deathbed redemption and go to the equivalent of heaven immediately upon death? Well, I'll tell you which religion says that. Ours. In the late 19th century, the Universalists had a full-on controversy over this point. Now, they all agreed that everyone would eventually go to heaven. But should dudes like Darth Vader have to burn off some major negative karma in purgatory first? We're just letting him in as if he were Yoda, are we? Some of the Universalists felt that you needed some time in the penalty box to provide justice and balance for your sins in this world. You need to be restored to glory before you can be with God for eternity. Thus, they were called the Restorationists. On the other side of this controversy was Hosea Ballou and his gang, who were known as the Ultra-Universalists. They believed that God's love overcame killing entire planets, killing younglings, and generally choking people out at meetings when you don't agree with what they say. Don't you wish Zoom had that button for some of these meetings we all have? Hosea Ballou would have loved that ending to the Return of the Jedi. The villain is ultimately redeemed by love. That's the story that ultra universalists could relate to. I believe that Star Wars has such widespread appeal because it taps into this collective unconsciousness in a way that only a few franchises can. And that is the only way that I can explain how Star Wars is even more popular now, 2 generations after it came out. Everyone can somehow connect with it, though of course not everyone does. One of the most brilliant things I think Star Wars ever did, at least what it did for me, was it changed the game in terms of action figures and toys. This was right in my wheelhouse when I was growing up. Now I could collect these figures and do Star Wars the way I wanted it to happen. In other words, Star Wars ceased being a story that George Lucas told me in a movie, and it becomes the story I tell for my own amusement. I can reenact and reimagine the story in new ways that fit my needs. Star Wars became personal in that way, and I think that's why it's such a cultural touchstone. And if money is any indication of something's value, well, I can tell you that a couple years ago I was at a convention and happened to see a vendor selling an old X-Wing toy, just like the one I got that Christmas morning. And all I can say is nostalgia is one of the most powerful drugs there is, and also one of the most expensive. Star Wars straddles that line between story and myth. It certainly is held in as high esteem by some as they might hold sacred scripture. But of course, not all stories are religious ones. Some of the stories that shape our lives have never been written down or spoken out loud, at least not in narrative form. I'm talking about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. Stories like I'm no good. I'm not a good student. I'm not that smart, or I'm not as pretty as the other girls. And also the opposite. I'm the best. No one can beat me, and they shouldn't even try. We get these messages from our parents, our teachers, our friends. We hear them from our peers, friends and foes alike. These are statements about who we are and how we relate to the world around us, at least according to what other people say to us about us. If those stories are positive and loving, then we'll likely grow up loving ourselves and generally feeling good about life and our place in it. If, however, we receive less than positive messages about ourselves, then we can internalize those stories too. They can be that voice inside our heads that talks to us whenever we try something new or dare to take a risk. You're a loser. It will never work. And so we take a step back and don't apply for that job or ask the attractive person on a date. Stories, my dear friends, are with us all the time. We don't have total control over all our stories, but we've got some control over some of them. Once you know to listen for those negative stories that creep up, you can be on the lookout. You can anticipate those debilitating feelings before they arise. We can even start by telling ourselves positive stories that empower us instead of hurt us. I think it's fair to say that Star Wars can inspire hope. The first movie is entitled A New Hope. When everything seemed lost, when evil seemed overwhelmingly in power, there was a small rebellion that kept itself alive based on hope and faith in something called the Force. A naive farmer from a backwoods planet becomes one of the heroes with 1,000 faces, as unlikely as it may seem. If he can do it, then I can do it. I can face down whatever overwhelming evil stands in my way, or I can at least give it a fighting chance even if I don't win. We don't have to be trapped in the negative stories given to us by our parents or our frenemies or a relationship partner who's unsupportive and controlling. Their stories about us don't have to be true. We can break out of them. It can happen, but it is not easy. It may take all of the spiritual and emotional resources we have. All of us chuckle now at my Uncle Ed telling me that Darth Vader won and Luke Skywalker died. That's kind of a depressing story. My little brain couldn't handle that would be how it could conclude. It was something of a traumatic moment for me as a kid, but somehow over the years, that initial anger faded. He was just trying to be funny and didn't mean to hurt my feelings. Ed felt about 2 inches tall when he saw me crying, and as time's gone by, it is now a joke. So well remembered that I had to tell the second half when Luke Skywalker actually did die. I spoiled the movie for him, and my revenge was complete. So we can reframe things. Episode that created anger and disappointment when I was a kid gets transformed into a running family joke. If negative stories come up for you today, next week, even next year, remember that heroes are real and that they live inside you. You can overcome, as the old spiritual intones. Let us never think that we are trapped by the stories we tell ourselves or that others try to tell about us to us. Instead, pick up a lightsaber, get a little training at it, and go take on the evil that lies at the heart of your personal universe. May you be blessed in your efforts, and remember, the Force will be with you always. I love you. Blessed be. Amen. Our benediction today comes from Elizabeth Strong, who passed away about a month ago. Elizabeth was a Unitarian Universalist minister who got her Doctor of Ministry right next to me. We were next in line alphabetically, and she was the mother to another friend of mine, the Reverend Douglas Gallagher, who is making her one of the few mother-son Unitarian minister partnerships or setups that we've ever had. And so for Mother's Day, I thought Elizabeth should have the last word. Seek for the spirit of life that is within you, that you might know more fully its power and strength. Seek for the spirit of life that surrounds you, that you may know more fully its connection to you. Seek for the spirit of life that is within others, that you might enter more fully into the community that embraces us this day and every day. So be it.